So Glenn, how did you get into astrology?
Well, probably like a lot of people, I just picked up a book on sun sign astrology. I think I was in the supermarket or something, and I came across an old book by Sidney Omar, one of the old time astrologers back in the 60s, and started reading up on my sun sign, and then eventually on the sun signs of friends and family members, and it was like a revelation. I got a clarity and an insight and an understanding into myself that was so confirming and so grounding and so helpful. It was almost like having a therapy session. So I was almost immediately sold on it because I intuitively recognized the validity of the personality profile that I was reading, even as simple as it was. And I'd be the first person today to say that sun sign astrology isn't particularly helpful, but I must say in my own experience, at that time in my life at least, it was very helpful and validating astrology. So at that point I started to branch out, one book after another. Didn't read a whole lot while I was in college because I didn't have time, but as soon as I got out of college I found myself in bookstores and gravitating to the astrology section and reading increasingly more sophisticated books on it. So I was actually reading a book on astrology as I was crossing the country from Connecticut to California. I was going out there at the time to write screenplays, so I thought. It turned out by the time I got to California, I was, although I didn't fully realize that I was well on my way to becoming a professional astrologer. Even at that point, I was only 22.
All right. So how has astrology impacted your life personally and as a career? Especially, you went for a degree in what?
Well, I eventually went back to school after about 3 years in LA. I just kept reading, and I was doing more work in astrology and various other systems of philosophy and comparative religion, metaphysics, and I Ching, Tarot. I was studying a lot of things, but astrology was really the heart of it. So I was working somewhat professionally as an astrologer, even when I was about 24, 25, and I decided to go back to study psychology because I realized that the kind of problems that people were coming in with, I didn't feel really equipped to deal with just as an astrologer. I wanted to get a little bit more grounding in counseling skills and understanding psychopathology, diagnosis, and developmental psychology, and so forth. So I was, from the start, however, blending and integrating astrology and psychology, even while I was in graduate school, pretty much out of the blocks. As far as how it's affected my life personally,
like how's it guided you, that kind of
thing? I mean, just very confirming, and the more I learned about astrology, the more insight, in a way, I developed into myself. So it was kind of a layering effect that would be like peeling the onion. With every new insight I had into myself, it clarified my understanding of astrology. And the more I continued to learn about astrology, the more it deepened my understanding of myself. So I think that without astrology, the level of insight, even with all the therapy and the psychological training I've had to receive in order to be a psychotherapist, I don't think that anything has been more helpful to me as far as understanding psychological issues, processes, internal conflicts, challenges, ways of working with and resolving some of the inherent conflicts in my own psyche. Nothing's been more helpful than astrology.
When you work with clients, how do you prepare for a session? And as a psychologist, do you look at the sort of angles, the aspects, and really try to help them iron out their forces of consciousness in that way? Or do you get nervous before a session? How do you prepare?
There's not a whole lot that I do now to prepare for a session. I've been studying astrology really seriously since 1972. So at this point, I just draw up the chart and I wait for the client to come in and have them tell me their story. One of the things that I've learned is that you don't want to have too many presuppositions about who the person is going to be that walks in that door or who calls you on the phone, because invariably the story that the client tells you, if you have the time and the patience to listen to it, and of course as as a psychotherapist, that's my job. I have the luxury of letting people tell me, in a sense, about their charts, just by virtue of doing the interview. So the level of insight and understanding I get into their chart on the basis of the story that unfolds organically in the sessions is much greater than anything I could have come up with on my own. I think when you're doing a blind reading and you haven't done a lot of research into the client or had the luxury of, again, finding out who the client is by gathering data and letting the story unfold, you can make educated guesses about the chart. To a great degree you can be correct, but your depth of understanding of that client is going to be seriously compromised by the lack of information that you have about the client. It's the story that unfolds that really lights up and enriches your understanding of that astrological chart and gives you an insight into the chart and ultimately into the client. It's kind of a back and forth movement. The more you know about the client, the better you can understand what that chart is actually indicating. The more you can understand that chart, the more you can translate that information from the client through the filter of the chart and then feed it back to the client in a kind of psychological language that gives them insight and depth of understanding into themselves that you couldn't do either strictly from just the consultation without astrology or with astrology without the consultation. It's the organic process, the feedback, the combination of the two that I think really deepens and enriches your understanding of that client and also of the chart.
Do you work with people multiple sessions so that you
Yes.
get the deeper issues?
Well, in ongoing therapy, that's the name of the game. It
Yeah.
can be anywhere from 6 to 8 sessions to 6 to 8 years. And it varies tremendously from client to client, but most of my clients probably are in therapy for, on the average of 6 months to 2 years. And the insight, I would probably say that I've learned more about astrology from working with clients in ongoing psychotherapy than from any other way of learning astrology. I think it affords you a depth of insight and understanding that you just can't get any other way.
So I have one question here I didn't tell you before. A famous person's chart. Do you have a chart that you like really a lot? Do you like certain who's your hero,
Well, I've got a lot of them, but I like the chart of Muhammad Ali a lot. He's somebody that comes to mind, but what would you like me to say? There's so many famous people that have interesting charts.
What books have you written or are working on, and what inspires you to write each day?
It's an endless fascination with the way in which astrology and psychology complement and enrich one another. I think psychology without astrology lacks soul. I mean, even though, Jungian psychology talks a lot about it being a psychology of soul, and it's not that it's not, but there's a structure and a precision and a clarity that astrology brings to Jungian psychology, and really pretty much any other model of psychology, that those models in and of themselves don't have. It adds a dimension. It makes them three-dimensional. It gives them a depth that without astrology they simply don't have by themselves. It's almost like being a medical practitioner without being able to look inside the human body. So you have to diagnose, but the body or the mind is like a black box. Whereas with astrology, it's like an X-ray machine that allows you to see directly inside the psyche, so that you're not just trying to figure out the generic psyche of humankind, but every chart, every individual human being is clarified by virtue of their individual chart. It's like gaining insight into the psychological DNA that makes up that person. So the more I go into psychology, developmental psychology, psychopathology, counseling skills, psychotherapy, various techniques for working with people. Astrology always adds a dimension to that makes it more interesting. Vice versa, the more I learn in psychology these various areas, the more that deepens and clarifies and enriches my understanding of astrology. So putting the two together, it's like an ongoing alchemical reaction. I keep having these ahas and these revelations and these flashes of insight that give such aesthetic appreciation and a kind of an awakening of my understanding of life. I could spend the next 4 lifetimes doing this, I feel, and never run out of new things to learn.
Yeah. When you are blending the psychology with the astrology, do you use transits and progressions, or just natal chart analysis, or a blend, or what seems to be the thing that really, makes the client sit forward in the seat and go, whoa?
Well, I'm a pretty nuts and bolts astrologer in that I focus mainly on transits and progressions. One of the things that I'm really interested in, however, it's a little bit outside the mainstream astrology, is the idea that the zodiac constitutes a natural developmental model, and that each sign of the zodiac represents a developmental stage of consciousness, and that you can understand the psychology of a sign by virtue of the developmental stage that sign correlates to. And each sign represents an orientation in time and space, and it's specifically that orientation in time and space that gives the psychology of that sign. To give you an example, Aries represents the first 18 months of life. Now, how do I know that? Well, if you study the sign of Aries as an archetypal process in and of itself, and you study simultaneously developmental psychology, you know that there's a transition point around 18 months where the infant kind of wakes up to what we call object permanence, and the sense that there's an objective world out there. That's the transition point from Aries to Taurus, astrologically speaking.
Is that when they start saying, I have, mine?
Right, I have, mine, object permanence. There's objects that exist out there in the world that have an existence independent of my perception of them, so I can retain in memory an image of that object, even though it's not immediately in front of me. Whereas in the first 18 months, prior to the development of object permanence, infants can only experience what is immediately before them. There's a sense of me, here, now. Nothing else exists. The sense of time is limited to the immediate present. The sense of space is limited to the immediate environment. And if you think about the psychology of Aries as impatient and impetuous and demanding and entitled and egocentric and aggressive and all of these things, those qualities make sense in the context of the time-space orientation. If there's no later other than now, of course you're going to be impatient, because there's a sense that if you're going to get something, you've got to get it now, because there is no later. There was no before. There's only the immediate present. And so forth and so on. As you go through the signs of the zodiac, what's interesting is that each sign constitutes a slightly longer period of time. So our sense of time tends to accelerate as we go through life. So each sign stage constitutes temporally a longer period of time, but subjectively, because time is accelerating, it constitutes experientially the same period of time. So, Aries is like birth to 18 months, Taurus would be approximately 18 months to 4 years, Gemini would be 4 years to 7, the period when we start school, learn language, Cancer is approximately 7 to 12. Each period of each sign constitutes maybe a year or so longer in actual real time, although subjectively it's experienced as equal time, than the sign that precedes it. So there's a fantastic developmental process that is built into the zodiac. That's a wonderful developmental model, and I think holds great promise, not only for astrology, but also for understanding a developmental model for psychology as well.
So there's like a relativity of experiential time periods,
Yeah, it's like each stage constitutes a different experience of time and space, and each stage represents a different developmental task, and so on and so forth, right around the zodiac.
As a scientist, I mean, how do some of your colleagues take astrology? I mean, doesn't have the best reputation in the world. Do they tease you about it?
I think some of my colleagues are intrigued in the field of psychotherapy. Some of them are excited. I think some of them are merely tolerant, and probably look at me a bit askance. I think it varies tremendously. I've the good fortune of living in California the last 35 years, so it's a little bit more progressive out there and open-minded. So I really haven't, and I think this is just probably my attitude. I don't really pay much attention to how other people regard what I do, because I'm so convinced of the validity and the value of it. What other people might think about it is of little consequence to me.
Mm-hmm. Spiritual path. What do you believe? Is there a transcendent being? Is there an infinite intelligence? Is there, and if so, why? If not, how do you approach that side of astrology, the mystical?
I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting parts of astrology. I'm an adherent of what some people would call the perennial philosophy, which is the core truths that reside at the heart of all the world's great religious and spiritual and metaphysical traditions. So for me, it's really about the evolution of consciousness, and the perennial philosophy really goes beyond any one particular doctrine. It's a kind of amalgamation of, again, the core truths and principles in a whole variety of doctrines. So I don't have any one particular faith, but I believe that there's a universal consciousness, Tao, Brahman, the one, the all, the absolute, the divine ground, call it what you may. I think consciousness is the primary reality, and that everything that we experience on the material plane is a crystallization of consciousness, so that consciousness is immanent in all things. It's a sort of field of intelligence that unites all of life and is orchestrating events in such a way that it brings about the further growth and transformation of individual consciousnesses, so that we are being led, in a sense, or grown from within back toward source. I believe in reincarnation. I think the evidence in support of reincarnation these days is just overwhelming if you take the time to really look into it. So I don't believe that consciousness begins with this life or ends with this life. And with that in mind, I don't think that the chart can be conflated with the individual, with the person. I think that we inhabit charts, or we take on charts in the same way that a student takes on a curriculum of courses. So the person is not really the chart, in the sense that he or she occupies the chart and makes the best of it, and actualizes the potential of that chart to varying degrees depending upon the quality of that soul that incarnates into that moment. Yeah, this has a lot of implications, by the way, for how we do astrology, because there's a school of thought that holds that everything about the person is ultimately reducible to the chart. I don't think that really holds up. I think that you can take 10 people, all of whom were born at the same time, in the same place, and they're going to live that chart out sometimes in radically different ways, depending upon the level of consciousness that that particular soul comes in with and utilizes to flesh out and actualize the potential that's in that chart.
Yeah, one time I had two clients that had been born, one was Mountain Standard, one was Eastern Standard, but they were born the same day but different times, and they had the exact same degree rising with all the same planets. They ended up marrying each other.
No kidding.
Yeah. And they asked me to do their synastry chart, and I'm like, what do you think about twins? To me,
very often you see twins. There's two ways of looking at it. If they're astrological twins, very often there's fascinating stories of parallel lives, and these have been historically documented. And I think it constitutes one of the more persuasive sources of evidence for the validity of astrology. On the other hand, there's twins that are born maybe a minute or two apart in the same family, genetically identical twins. And very often those twins while they have some features in common, they're very different. And I think, again, this suggests that the chart is not the person. Part of that can be explained by virtue of there's a natural need to differentiate from your twin.
Like one would develop like the moon and one would develop the sun?
Right, so each one may identify with different parts of the chart, repress and project others, just like you would as an individual. I mean, you may identify with certain parts of your chart and consciously express those, and other parts of the chart that are less conscious and you're less comfortable with, you repress and project, and it shows up in the environment in terms of the kinds of people and relationships that you attract. The same thing can happen with twins, so that each twin will live out different parts of the chart in an attempt to differentiate from their twin. So I think there's a great deal of plasticity and choice in how charts are inhabited and lived out.
Yeah, just the fact that there are twins shows that there's an archetype of the twins. Groups like the astrology community. What has been your experience of the growing astrology community? It's obviously expanded over the last 20, 30 years, and all these new astrologers are coming in. You can get a degree now at Kepler and all these other places like.
Well, it's evolving. I think astrology has always been evolving, maybe with the exception of between 1700 and 1900, where it went into a kind of incubation or hibernation, if you will, and then it kind of woke up again in the 1900s. The whole history of astrology is a fascinating study in itself, but certainly over the last 100 years, there's been tremendous change and growth constantly from one decade to another in terms of both the recovery, more recently, of our past, which is almost simultaneous with the movement forward into a new future that is integrating some of the information and the studies that have come out of the field of psychology, science, metaphysics in general. So it's kind of like, we're moving backward, but also moving forward at the same time. And I think the most interesting part of what's happening now is the possibility for cross-fertilization. There's problems, I think, with the traditional astrology, or the traditional astrology in general. There's also problems, I think, with humanistic or psychological astrology that began in the 60s. And I think that the problems of one community can look for their solution in the other. And so the possibility of bringing those two things together and creating some kind of hybrid, some kind of integrated, blended model, I think it is very exciting indeed. And that's something that I'm particularly interested in. As far as the community is concerned in general, I don't think you'll find a more interesting group and a more eclectic group of people anywhere in any field. I mean, the courage it takes to be an astrologer, I think to be a really good astrologer requires a certain level of intelligence, a certain capacity for symbolic thinking, a certain spiritual openness, a certain rigor and discipline. There's all sorts of qualities that it takes to be an astrologer that shows up in the quality of people that do well in this field, that I just feel blessed to be a part of this community. And it's like a tribe that, sort of dissipates and then, reforms and pulls together again. And we meet at these conferences all over the world, and then it dissipates out again, and then it reforms again someplace else. And it's just been a great journey. I'm very grateful for my opportunity to be a part of it.
Well, let's start toward the end. Is there anything I should ask you that I didn't know to ask?
Yeah, I think that the thing that, for me, is most exciting about the field is how astrology clarifies the relationship between the psyche and its environment in a way that no other model provides. The idea of synchronicity, of course, comes out of Jungian theory, but it's more of an idea, I think, than it is something that can be utilized to the fullest potential that is actually possible With astrology, when you look at the chart, any particular part of the chart has both a subjective and objective meaning. So there's a psychological dimension to the chart that various parts of the chart represent. At the same time, those same parts are going to represent an environmental dimension, an event-oriented dimension. It is the relationship between subjective and objective and the circular causality between the two, which, if properly understood, I think deepens and accelerates your understanding of the meaning of events and how those events are both mirroring and also providing a catalyst for the further development and evolution of the psyche in a way that is so clear and is so differentiated and so profound. There just isn't any other personality model out there that even comes close to understanding how this operates other than astrology.
Yeah, and sometimes it manifests very literally. You know, like I had a client last week had Pluto crossing her Venus in the 6th house, and I thought, Venus governs Taurus and Libra. You have any problems with your kidneys or your neck? And she said, how did you know? I just had surgery on my neck, and and I said, are you? There's like 5 major things with Mercury going on, including progressed Mercury in the midheaven. I said, and what about this communication that needs to go out the world? Uranus was crossing her midheaven too, and she was like, how did you know I was writing a book? And I can't write it because of my arm injury. And I said, well, North Node in Gemini, North Node's the dragon in Gemini. I said, there's this new program called Dragon that you can just talk and it'll communicate, it'll type for you. And she was like, and sometimes it's just so literal, you know?
Yeah, it's so literal, exactly. It's I think that, you know, when you think about transits and progressions, from a psychological perspective, we like to think of transits representing qualities of durations of time. It's the quality of the time that I think the transit describes. We can always hypothesize about particular events that might occur, and they can be important, but I think mainly as catalysts or as a vehicle for stimulating certain psychological processes, certain developmental processes. So the meaning of the event in and of itself is not so important, other than its purpose, how it stimulates, it activates, it challenges the psyche in very specific ways to deepen, to change, to transform, to heal, to evolve. Again, to have a tool that actually shows you not only the quality of the time, but the particular duration of that time, the window of opportunity that it represents, the requirement, in a sense, that it imposes on the psyche, and it gives you some sense of how to meet that challenge, to take full advantage, however difficult or challenging that period of time might be. It's just such a profound and wonderful tool for counselors and psychotherapists. Again, I think that to do psychotherapy without astrology it's like swinging in the dark. It's like having to do surgery with no understanding of human anatomy. You know, I could go on with metaphors, but
even the artist, it helps the artist, you know, architecture, everything, you know, just wow. Any final thoughts? We got 5 minutes left.
No, I think that's probably probably it for me.
Okay, good. Good man. I love it.